Stephen, is this a good idea for the US to be reimposing or imposing sanctions on Iran following last week's tests?
It's hard to imagine that the White House had much other choice. The Iranians went out of their way to do something that required some sort of U.S. response. So it would be unrealistic to think they were just going to do nothing. What they're doing with, frankly, a rather weak sanctions regime, inevitably weak at this point, is they're presumably trying to send some signal to the Iranians that this sort of thing has a cost. The problem with this, though, is if it goes much beyond where it is now, if the administration decides it has to escalate, it's very unclear how much real leverage they've got if the signal doesn't work and the Iranians don't knock off this kind of behavior. I mean, for sanctions to have any bite, they've got to be multilateral. And all the other actors that would have to be part of a multilateral sanctions regime have some reason to be annoyed with the United States at the moment and have significant economic disincentives to cooperate in the sanctions regime. So it's probably going to be very hard for them to do economically a whole lot more pressure on the Iranians than what already exists. That means if you're going to go further than that, you need to start shooting people, and that's a whole different set of problems.
Stephen, we've just recently had this Obama-sponsored agreement that eased restrictions in exchange for Iran's promise not to develop nuclear weapons. How does this intrude on that?
Well, that agreement at the moment isn't in play. What the Iranians did with the missile test is argued by many to be a violation of the spirit of a separate UN Security Council resolution on missile technology. The agreement on nuclear issues with Iran is specifically about nuclear issues. Now, part of what's going on here are general signals about the quality of the U.S.-Iranian relationship, so that in principle can incorporate all kinds of things. But if we really decide we want to renegotiate the nuclear deal per se, not this missile technology issue, but the nuclear deal per se, the multilateral dimension becomes even more important than it is otherwise. We've got to get all of our allies, as we did the first time we negotiated this, to back us up when we do that. And a big part of the reason they backed us up the first time is they thought they were getting a good faith negotiation that was serious about a negotiated settlement to this thing, and they were cooperating in order to get a negotiated settlement, which they got. Where they would view reopening all that now and renegotiating all that now, even if it's after an Iranian missile test that isn't literally nuclear in and of itself, is far from clear, especially given the general tenor of U.S. commentary about things like obsolete NATO alliances, many of whose members are required to cooperate if the United States is going to reopen this negotiation.
Dr. Biddle, this is Twitter diplomacy again. You know, the Iranian foreign minister is taken to tweeting defenses of Iran and also attacks on the US and saying that there will be reprisals and that Iran had done nothing wrong by trying to defend itself with these tests. Also not allowing the wrestling team in, which is maybe a little bit of a petty move. How quickly could this escalate into something that we'd need to take extraordinarily more seriously?
Well, that depends on how the Trump administration responds to this. I mean, many administrations in this situation would say, okay, we fired a shot across the bow, now let's let this calm down. Let's let all the tempers cool, and let's move on and do other things. That has not been characteristic of the way this president has tended to respond to this kind of thing. If the United States reacts aggressively, more tweets, more executive orders, more announcements of unilateral sanctions, and so forth, you could get pretty rapid escalation in principle. That would not, in my view, be in U.S. interests. I'm not convinced it would be in Iran's interests either. But both sides can drag each other upward pretty quickly if they're so inclined. Again, the normal presidential administration, knowing that that's a risk, would at this point, having done its bit and signaled both to domestic supporters and to Iranians and others that we aren't prepared to ignore this sort of thing, would be looking for opportunities to de-escalate this. We'll see.